How one mountain man's secret trick made his fire burn all night with wet wood. The snow had fallen quietly through the night, blanketing the pines like thick ash after a long-forgotten fire. Each branch held its breath, bent under the weight of winter's silence. Nothing moved. The creek behind the cabin had frozen just enough to hold its reflection, but not its song. The sky hadn't decided if it would stay gray or surrender to dawn. Inside the cabin, the wood stove exhaled weak warmth, not from flame, but from memory. It was a cabin made not of logs, but of resignation. Chipped beams, handmade shelves too low, smoke stains above the lantern hooks. Everything had the weary permanence of something built by hands that never expected company again. He sat by the fire like a man listening for news. From a war he lost long ago, not old, not young, just carved by solitude. His beard wasn't for show, and his boots weren't for walking. He hadn't spoken in days, maybe weeks. But silence wasn't empty here. It was thick, lived in, like a second skin stitched from years of weather and withdrawal. The chair creaked when he leaned forward, feeding damp logs into the weak fire. They hissed, spit, and resisted. He didn't flinch, didn't curse, just waited, watching the flames like they were stubborn children he understood better than himself. A rusted tin of some kind of mix sat beside him. Dark powder clumped with resin and ground bark. He pinched a bit between his fingers, almost reverently, and sprinkled it under the log. No smoke, no crackle, just heat, slow, rising, alive. Within minutes, the fire responded like a sleeping animal nudged by a familiar hand. Outside, the wind changed direction. The branches whispered, soft at first, then stronger. Something was coming, not a storm. Not yet. A crow landed on the porch railing. Black eyes blinked once. Then again, watching him, he didn't look up, but he spoke. Too early, friend. The words, brittle and low, cracked the cabin's hush like glass under frost. It was the first sound of his voice in a long time. Not for anyone, not even the crow. Just a breath that remembered it used to carry words. Then, a knock, 3 slow raps on the cabin door. Not loud, not afraid, but out of place, like thunder in a whisper. His hand paused over the fire. The crow fluttered off. The mountain man stood, not quickly, not with surprise, but with the kind of stillness that knew winter wasn't the only thing that could return. And as he reached for the door, something in the fire cracked loud, like a memory splitting open. It was the first time in 3 years that the mountain man had come down from the ridge. No one knew his name anymore, just called him Ash, like something left behind after something else had burned. The logging town's general store was quieter than usual that day, not out of respect, out of discomfort. Men paused mid-conversation, hands halfway to sacks of grain or nails, watching him walk in like a ghost, dragging boots through sawdust. He didn't speak, just nodded once to the old woman at the counter, then turned toward the woodpile near the stove, reached inside his coat, and placed a small tin beside it. I came to pay what I owe, he said. His voice was smoke over gravel, soft but not unsure. The room didn't respond. The woman hesitated, eyes flicking toward the corner where a younger man leaned, clean coat, polished boots, smirk curling beneath a sharp mustache. He was the store's new overseer. Not from the mountains, not from around here at all. That's not how we settle things anymore, the man said loudly, stepping forward. The tin sat quietly by the stove, like a secret. Ash didn't flinch. She said 6 pounds of pitch blend. That tin holds 9. Burn true in wet fog. The overseer chuckled. The kind that echoes off walls because no one else joins in. You think anyone here gives a damn how you burn your logs? Or what little tricks you used to stay warm while the rest of us worked in daylight? He kicked the tin, sending it rolling across the wooden floor. The sound was small but sharp, a metallic confession bouncing against silence. Still, no one spoke. Not the men by the feed bags, not the woman behind the counter. They watched, eyes down, like shame could be shared if they stared hard enough at the floor. Ash looked at the tin, now spinning slowly to a stop. He made no move to retrieve it, just said low, "She was your mother." The overseer's eyes narrowed, the smirk fading. "You watch your mouth." he said, stepping closer. "You crawl out of your hole to act noble now?" "No," Ash answered simply. "Just came to return what kept me alive." The silence stretched. Thicker than before, heavier. Then a voice. He's right. Everyone turned. A girl, maybe 17, stepped from behind a shelf of preserves. She wore her coat wrong, sleeves too long, but her spine was straight. Her voice didn't shake. "My grandmother told me. Said he saved her during the storm of '08. Shared fire, not just wood. Said his flame didn't die, even when everything else froze." The overseer's jaw twitched. "You don't know what you're talking about." But she stepped forward, picked up the tin, and placed it gently back where Ash had set it. "Maybe we should remember what real warmth costs," she said, looking around. No one met her eyes, but the silence changed. Less indifference, more unease. Ash didn't smile, just nodded once, to the girl, to the tin, to the stove, then turned and walked out, leaving the snow to swallow his footsteps before anyone found the courage to speak. The storm moved in that night, like an old debt, slow, cold, and unforgiving. Ash had barely reached the edge of the pines when the wind began to howl. Not just wind, the kind that bites through coat seams and rattles your ribs from the inside. By the time he reached the footbridge near the creek, his hands were stiff, and the sky had gone darker than usual. He was about to cross when he saw her, a figure, hunched, still, wrapped in oilcloth and holding a small mule by the reins. Her boots were caked in slush, and one was untied. Her hair was soaked to the scalp, cheeks raw from wind. She didn't look up when he approached, didn't flinch, just said quietly, "He said it wasn't my place anymore." Ash stood beside her, eyes not on her, but on the broken trail ahead. "Town?" he asked. She nodded once. He looked at the mule, then at the storm clouds swallowing the ridge. "Won't make it," he said. She didn't argue, just tightened her grip on the reins, jaw set. Silence stretched between them. A silence not of strangers, but of two people who had both been pushed out and left to walk anyway. He turned back toward the slope. Cabins uphill. She didn't thank him, just followed. They climbed without words, one step then another, snow soaking through soles and silence filling the spaces between footfalls. When they reached the door, he didn't gesture or speak, just opened it. Inside, the fire was barely holding on. He moved quietly, stoking the coals with wet wood, then the mix, just enough to coax it back to life. She stood in the corner, not removing her coat, not sitting, just watching like she wasn't sure this wasn't some trick. Still, he placed a tin cup near the stove, filled it with water, waited. When the steam rose, he added a pinch of pine tea, then handed it to her. Only then did she sit. They didn't speak through dinner. She ate the salted beans with chipped spoon, careful not to spill. He carved wood by lantern light, not to make anything, just to keep his hands from remembering things. Later, as the wind howled louder outside, she took off her coat. Her sleeves were torn. A bruise peeked beneath her collarbone. He noticed, but said nothing. Instead, he stood, crossed to the small cabinet, and pulled out a wool shirt. Frayed but warm. He placed it on the table between them. "You can keep it," he said. She didn't touch it. Not yet, but her shoulders dropped just slightly. Enough to know she'd understood. That night they slept, not beside each other but within the same warmth, and for the first time in years, Ash didn't wake every hour to check the fire. It burned steady, as if two kinds of cold had finally agreed to stay quiet. The days passed not in hours, but in quiet rituals. Mornings began with the clink of the kettle over low firelight, the scent of charred pine and cold metal. Ash would wake first, always. He'd stoke the coals before the frost claimed them, never looking back to see if she stirred. She did, always after, but never before he made the fire speak again. She swept the floor with an old broom, not because it needed it, but because doing something, anything, made the silence feel shared. There was no conversation, just rhythms he carved. She boiled roots. He fixed the hinge on the pantry door. She mended a tear in his coat sleeve without asking. The snow outside grew deeper, turning paths to stone and windows to frosted glass. Inside, the world was small, the space between two chairs. the warmth of a fire, and the sound of wood cracking in the stove like distant voices trying to return. One afternoon, she was tending the fire when her hand slipped too close to the iron door. She hissed quietly, not loud, just enough for the pain to escape her mouth. He was across the room before she pulled her hand back fully. No words, just action. He took her wrist gently, the way a man does when he's held too much pain to ever add to it. He dipped a cloth in the snow water, touched it to her burn. She didn't wince. She just watched his face. How careful it was, how still. When he wrapped the bandage, their eyes met for the first time in full. Not in passing glances, not in shadows, but in full light. Her lips parted slightly, not to speak. Just to breathe, he stood. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. That night, she added a spoonful of salt to the pot before he could. He noticed, said nothing. Trust grew like the fire, not with spark, but with patience. It was in the way she set 2 tin mugs instead of 1, in how he left the front door unlatched when he went to chop wood, in the way their silences overlapped, not echoing against each other but folding inward, like 2 branches leaning from different trees but bending toward the same wind. Sometimes she hummed under her breath. Nothing loud, just a note or two, almost a memory. He never asked what song it was. He just listened. One morning he came in soaked, a branch having cracked his brow while hauling down logs from the icy slope. Blood dripped down his temple like slow ink. She pulled him to the chair, didn't ask permission. Cleaned the cut with hands that didn't shake. "You need stitches," she said, the first word spoken in days. He only nodded. She did it slow, steady, not once looking away. When she tied the final knot in the thread, she placed her palm gently over his chest. Not affection, not apology, just grounding. As if to say, "You're still here," and he was. That night he gave her a flint striker. Not with ceremony, just placed it beside her cup. She looked at it, then at him, then lit the fire herself. The snow had softened, but the air had not. Something sharper than cold hung outside the cabin that morning. Something with weight, with memory. Ash felt it before he saw it, before he heard it. Tracks, not of deer or hare, no. These were deliberate. Boots, 2 sets. Deep, firm. Made recently. He didn't say anything as he shut the cabin door behind him. She was at the stove, stirring the kettle. Her eyes met his, searching, then sharpening. She knew. He nodded once, quiet. She said nothing, but her hand tightened on the wooden spoon until her knuckles went white. By midday, they heard them. 2 men, heavy coats, polished rifles, and the kind of swagger that didn't need to shout. One of them was the overseer. The other wore a badge on his belt and a dead smile. "Evening," the deputy said like it wasn't early afternoon. "Heard a squatter's been hiding out up here. Said he owed property taxes, skipped court. That you, mountain man?" Ash stood beside the stove. Behind him the fire crackled softly, not defensive, just alive. "I came to town. Paid what I could. Left the rest." The overseer stepped forward, eyes fixed on the woman. "And you?" he asked coldly. "You still think you get to pick where you belong? You walk out, don't think you'll walk back in without questions." She didn't answer. Her hands were still, her spine straight. The deputy smirked, tapping ash from his glove. "That fire trick of yours." "People talk. Even out here. Could be worth something to the company. Could be you're sitting on a patent you don't own." Ash said nothing. The deputy's smile faded. "We can do this 2 ways. You come quietly. She returns with us, clean, civil." Silence. Then Ash took a step forward. Just one. He reached down, lifted the tin from beside the stove, held it up gently, then walked to the open hearth and emptied it. Slowly, deliberately. The powder hit the flame like snow on steel. No flare, just heat, warm, pure, ancient. The deputy's hand moved toward his belt. The overseer took another step in, but Ash didn't flinch, didn't speak. He stood between them and the fire like it was sacred, like it was the only truth he had left. And then the woman moved. She walked over and stood beside him. Not behind, beside, her shoulder touching his. She faced the men, eyes unblinking. "No one here is hiding," she said. "You're just not looking in the right places for honesty." The words fell heavy in the room. The deputy blinked. The overseer's jaw clenched. Outside, the wind picked up. Ash reached over and pulled the door wide open. The fire roared behind him. He didn't ask them to leave. He didn't need to. They stood a moment too long, then turned. The door shut behind them, not with force, but with finality. Inside, neither of them moved. Then Ash turned to her quietly and placed the empty tin back where it had always sat, not because he needed it now, but because he chose to stay standing. Even when the cold tried to call him back down, they returned at dusk, not because they needed to, but because men like that never accept silence as an answer. The wind had died, but the tension had not. Ash had been outside splitting kindling. She was inside by the fire, sharpening the old kitchen blade. Neither of them was surprised when the boots crushed snow again. This time, there were three of them. The deputy, the overseer, and a third man, older, suited, and dry, like the inside of a law book. He held a paper rolled in one hand like a weapon. "You've refused a lawful order," the deputy said flatly. "We brought legal support." The man in the suit stepped forward, eyes scanning the humble cabin, the handmade table, the fire still burning steady. "We're here to inform you this land is not yours. This structure is not registered, and the property contains materials considered proprietary by virtue of—" "Stop," Ash said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even face them directly. He spoke to the fire. Then slowly he stood. "This land held my wife," he said. "This cabin held my grief. That fire held my winter breath when nothing else would. What do you own of that?" The suited man shifted. The deputy stiffened. "You can make this difficult," the overseer muttered, stepping toward the doorframe, hand grazing the rifle at his shoulder. But it was the woman who moved this time. She walked past Ash, past the stove, past everything she'd grown quiet within, and stepped right into the open door. The snow framed her like a border between two worlds. "If this place is yours," she said, "take it." Her voice didn't shake. Her chin didn't lower. She turned her back to them and walked out into the snow. No coat, no plea. Nothing but the sound of her footsteps fading. Ash watched her go, not with panic, not with sorrow, but with a kind of patience born from having watched love leave before. He looked at the men. Then, without word, he walked to the fire. Kneeling down, he opened the stove door. The flame danced like a child caught in trouble. He reached into the tin, empty. He smiled, small, soft, then said one thing: "She burns because I fed her, not because I owned her." The words hung there, suspended, weightless and devastating. The suited man shifted again, but he couldn't look Ash in the eyes. Outside, the wind picked up once more. The deputy coughed. The overseer muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. Ash stood still, framed by fire and smoke. His hands blackened with soot but steady. No one moved forward. No papers were handed. They left without slamming the door, without saying goodbye, because there's no law stronger than the one that lives in silence. That night, he found her a few hundred paces down the trail, sitting beneath a bare cedar tree, snow melting on her shoulders. He placed the old wool coat over her without speaking. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. And together, they walked back into the dark, not to fight, not to win, but to endure side by side, where even wet wood could burn if someone just believed it should. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in slow drips from the eaves, in the soft collapse of snow against cabin walls, in the first sound of birds testing their song like uncertain memories. The creek thawed quietly, whispering again between stones it once forgot. Trees shed their white coats, revealing bark the color of ash and rebirth. Ash no longer checked the door each morning. He didn't need to. The silence had changed, no longer watchful, but peaceful. Inside, the cabin breathed differently. The air no longer tasted like survival. It tasted like home. She stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she no longer wanted to leave. They built new shelves together, crooked but holding well. They planted bitterroot near the edge of the slope. He taught her how to split logs in halves that sang when they hit the stump. She showed him how to dry herbs for tea that didn't just warm, but soothed. They still didn't speak much, but their words had become things: a folded shirt, a mended glove, a meal left steaming before sunrise. The fire still burned each night, even with wet wood, even without the secret mix, because now it burned with more than science. It burned with presence, with will, with warmth exchanged without cost. One morning she left a note on the table: gone to the river. He followed the tracks down the slope, not to check on her, just to walk the same path. When he found her, she was crouched near the bank, hands in the cold water, watching fish flash like silver apologies. He stood beside her, said nothing. She looked up and smiled, not wide, not bright, just enough. They stayed there till the sun climbed high enough to melt everything they had once feared. Back at the cabin, the fire was still alive, glowing low but steady. No tin, no tricks, no need, only kindling, patience, and presence. And as twilight dipped its fingers back into the hills, the wind shifted once more, brushing past the open window, carrying no scent of loss, no threat of return, just a memory and a whisper. Some fires burn not because they must, but because someone stayed to tend them.